declaration is out that 7 provinces are now declared disaster after heavy rainfalls that continues. The only 2 provinces that are excluded, really, and we hope it would remain that the Western Cape and the Free State, that perhaps others will also come out of that. It's been raining heavily, and it's also raining where I am right now. So lots of rain and lots of floods, and the rain does not seem to be stopping anytime soon.
And what's the average amount of rain that we've been experiencing over the past couple of days? And I'm just wondering how much is needed for flooding to begin and damage to be caused, particularly talking about not only infrastructure as in buildings, but for bridges to be washed away.
Well, I mean, you would have seen. I mean, I think a day or two in the N4 in the Schoemanskloof when there was a mudslide, going into the road and also washing away of some bridges in some areas. How much rainfall is needed to really cause damage? I mean, in some of the areas that you're showing on your screen, it's low-lying areas where informal settlements are, where they're not really supposed to be building in those areas. And in some areas could be issues of infrastructures that has to do with drainage system, that some of this drainage system is either too old and too small to accommodate the growing population, and some of it could even be issues of littering, that when it starts raining, then the litter that is in the drainage system start clogging, and it quickly, even if it might not necessarily be a heavy rain, it quickly clogs the infrastructure that is there. So too old infrastructure as well could be the problem as well. It might not necessarily be very heavy rainfall, but we've been receiving quite a heavy rainfall in the month of Feb.
And just to understand the geographic distribution of particularly the heavy rainfall or the rain belts, I see that Tshwane and Ekurhuleni over the past couple of days seem to be the ones that have been inundated with heavy rainfall, where there's been a vast amount of rain that's seen flooding. Can you explain that to us?
Well, I'm not really a weather specialist myself. I was watching your weather colleague reporting, especially in the south of Johannesburg. And that rain has moved because in December, the western part of Johannesburg, looking at Joburg, that's the part that got damaged a lot, with the roads being washed away and bridges being washed away. And now it has moved in the Ekurhuleni. I think it is also these areas that get affected a lot. It's the location as well, located by the riverbanks, low-lying areas as well, and the informal settlement as well, where the rain is it's making much of its damages. And I think maybe back to that issue of infrastructure as well, it plays a really, really, really major issues, because the flooding usually affects these areas that have informal settlement, because they just build everywhere, because I suppose people are in need of some sort of accommodation.
So you mentioned that the low-lying areas are naturally the ones that are most affected. I think it was towards the end of the year that we saw a report saying that about 2,000 homes in Gauteng were destroyed. So is it also the lack of maintenance of infrastructure? Speak to us about the town planning aspects of this.
I think, Tapiso, most of our towns, either townships or even some suburban areas that get flooded, it would be because when the town planning was done during apartheid, it would have catered for a certain number of people. So the populations has increased when you see post 1994 with free movement of people throughout the country. That means that people can now live and settle wherever. And those towns and those townships or suburbs, their infrastructure never really got upgraded. And what we've seen is that you've had new cities that get built, instead of expanding or changing or improving and rehabilitating the old infrastructures in the form of drainage system, in this case of flooding, to ensure that the new population that has increased, it is also catered by the rehabilitated and improved infrastructure. So that would be an issue where you see flooding also going in areas where it's not necessarily low-lying areas and it's not necessarily informal settlement that are built within and along the riverbanks. It's just issues of infrastructure being too small to accommodate the growing population. So maybe we could say that, I don't know, overpopulation issues serviced by old infrastructure that is too small for them.
I mean, I just saw the human settlements minister speaking at some point about private developers and poor drainage systems. So if we're talking about a national state of disaster, where are the funds then directed?
Well, the funds would have to be directed to different structures. I suppose you mean the funds to provide some relief into the areas that are affected by disaster and the areas that are declared disaster areas. Those funds, would have to come from the National Treasury in case the national disaster management centers and also the provincial structures and also the local structures that deals with disaster runs out of funds, because it seems we are having disaster after disaster. There was a point which we haven't quite moved out of that in South Africa, that we have sort of become a commission of inquiry country, and now it's worrying because there's a new developing trend, even after the SONA, when the president declared the state of disaster on energy, now is the floods in seven provinces. So I'm just worried that the funds that are already budgeted in those different disaster management center structures in the national, provincial, and local government will run out of money. That means that the National Treasury would have to allocate more funds to these structures. And as well, another element to bring, when you have these national disaster declared, it seemingly everything becomes urgent. We've seen with COVID, and it opens a lot of negative consequences that comes with this: corruption, flawed in procurement procedures not being adhered to. So we're sort of afraid to see the repeat as well. That does this also open a gate to loot the funds, because the Public Financial Management Act, it's not so much adhered to, because you're trying to solve everything as quick as possible and treat everything as a disaster and urgent.